It's my honor to introduce my friend and brother, John Wiens, who is an active, lifelong educational leader and public education advocate, and Dean Emeritus and Senior Scholar at the Faculty of Education, University of Manitoba. John has been a teacher, guidance counselor, principal, superintendent of schools, and university professor. He has also served as president of the Manitoba Teachers Society, the Canadian Education Association, Manitoba Research Council, and the Manitoba Educators for Social Responsibility. He spent many years as chair of the university's Grants Commission, as director of the Canadian Teachers Foundation, Manitoba Association of School Superintendents, and the National Society for the Study of Education. John is a past chair of the board of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, and also a past member of the Premier's Advisory Council on Education, Poverty, and Citizenship, and the Campaign 2000 Steering Committee for the Elimination of Child Poverty. He earned his PhD in education from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver in 2000. And the same year, he received an honorary doctorate from the Brandon University for contributions to teacher professional development. He has also received numerous awards for service to education and teacher education. Currently, he is spending his time speaking and writing about education for democracy, First Nations governance of education, and student achievement beyond standards. I'm sure you have, he's a very regular contributor of articles, scholarly articles in the Free Press. I'm sure you've seen some of that. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. John Wiens.
Thank you, Srini. I'd like to meet that guy. He's been busy. First of all, I want to thank you, President Nancy. I think that's what I'm supposed to call you, right? So, President Nancy, thank you so much for the invitation. I am extremely honored to be able to speak to your group today. I'm not sure that I can actually provide a lot of new ideas or things you don't know, but we might reaffirm some of our collective commitments to making the world a better place. So before I start, I'd just like to say that I'm a severe critic of Bill 64. So you should know up front, I have a strong bias. This is a nonpartisan view. It wouldn't matter to me who came up with this legislation. It's horrible legislation, and the implementation document that goes with it would get an F for critical writing. These are two documents that are very poor, very poorly written, very poorly put together, and very poorly conceived. And I deem them to be extremely undemocratic and extremely uneducational. So with that, if you need to understand that I'm not very happy with this stuff up front. And I'd also say that when I'm finished talking, if you ask Srini Reddy, he probably knows more about this than I do. So in any case, and he looked better too. So in any case, I'd like to proceed and just say I have some sense of Rotary. My biggest sense of Rotary I've got from Srini himself since he became active and joined. And I'm just really honored that you would consider having me with you today. Today, all I'm asking people to do is to think about the things I tell you. You don't have to accept what I say. These are my views. As I've indicated, they're strongly held. But you should make your own decisions and decide for yourselves how you see them. I would start with, because this is an issue on the role of education and poverty, I'd start with a quotation from the Carnegie Council on Children from 1977. Carnegie Council set up a study on poverty and children, and they concluded with this: the single greatest harm to children is poverty. Okay, and then proceeded to indicate why they believe that to be the case, and then proceeded to offer some suggestions. What is true here, we actually don't need a PowerPoint, but it's up to you. So if you're looking at this, I'm actually on slide 5 now. What is true here is that we, and I'd also say that these slides, I make no claim other than I'm willing to share them with anybody. You can share them with anybody. There's no intellectual property involved with this. My views are always, shareable with everybody, and I'll stand by them until somebody convinces me differently. But so what we have is a bill which implies that somehow we've gone wrong in education in a big way, and that we actually need to study further the relationship between poverty and poor educational achievement. And I would say just up front that I want you to really beware of the images of the bill, because the bill reduces democracy in a number of different ways. It actually puts more and more power in fewer and fewer hands, a lot more power taken away from 300 to 350 people by the structures that we currently have in Manitoba, and put in the hands of the government caucus, mainly the premier probably, and 15 appointed people, 15 politically appointed people. So instead of 350 people involved in governance and making decisions about education and education for children in their local communities, we have 15 people appointed by the province and centrally making those decisions. And then I'm just going to I'm not going to spend any more time on this slide, other than to say that it also increases privatization and commodification of education, as education being something that you can kind of trade away. So the only reference in either one of these documents to poverty is this one right here, Pillar 3, which says future ready students advance intersectoral work on reducing disparities and addressing absenteeism. Okay. And then the priority action, which is under that pillar, says establish a task force in connection with the poverty reduction strategy to examine the linkages between poverty and education and support the implementation of strategies to improve engagement and outcomes. Now, you really have to read these things very carefully, because if you go to the next slide, I want to say, this is what I have to say about this. Poverty is being used to blame public schools for their inability to solve the problems associated with child poverty. Basically put the whole blame for lack of children's success on the school system, and particularly the public school system, which is where most of these children go to school. So we're blamed, as a public school system, we're blamed for their poor achievement, and we share that blame. The system shares that blame with their teachers, their homes, the communities, and the children themselves. So we're actually blaming the victims, I would say, of a particular kind of governance structure and a particular kind of attitude. It's defined as an educational problem. It's defined in terms of lack of engagement, absenteeism, lack of school completion, and unpreparedness for future work. And the answers are singularly focused on outputs, which basically suggests that what we're looking at is people who aren't doing the thing right. if we only did the thing right, we would get the answers at the end of the day and these kids would be okay. And these things are all about frequent standardized test scores and comparing those test scores, school attendance, graduation rates, holding school people responsible. And it really is a diversion from the real problem, which is upfront kind of resources to children and families, poor children and families. So I've called my next slide, Who Are the Poor? And who are the poor? Well, most poor children actually come from poor families. And the easiest definition is, of course, they do not have the financial means to provide people with food, security, but also shelter and nutrition and so on. They don't have the resources to provide them with timely care, education resources and experiences, personal safety and shelter, even contemporary attire, meaning that even the clothes that kids wear, you know, actually let other people know they're poor, you know, and the kids very often are ashamed of the fact that these are the clothes that they have, these are the only clothes they have to wear into the public space, which is the school system. So the definition of poor needs to be expanded a lot from the definition that we see in government documents. Probably for me, the most problematic notion of children, of poor children, is that they have to assume adult responsibilities prematurely. Now, I certainly was involved when I was involved with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. I learned that children were being forced into the adult sexual world prematurely. And so that's one thing, but children, and I know many of these children, have to care and care of multiple types. By that I mean food, protection, clothing, etc. for younger siblings. They have to get food for them. They have to make sure they get on the buses to get to school. They assume a number of adult roles, which they should not be responsible for. And so
Are you muting me again?
Yeah. That's a definition of what it means to be a poor child. And here's my last one. People and children. The poor are people and children who experience extreme privacy. And by extreme privacy, I mean, we don't hear from them. We push them away, we don't hear from them. They're neglected, they're exploited, and that's always happens in secret. We actually don't see the public face of this very often unless we venture downtown or whatever. And they also have extreme publicity. For instance, if you're on social assistance, people know how you spend every penny, what your health is like, things that most of us consider to be private matters actually happen in public for people. So they have, you know, these kind of contradictory things, extreme privacy and extreme publicity. So the reality, going to the next slide, is this. The relationship is indisputable, and it has been indisputable. This is not news to anybody. It's been indisputable for 50 to 60 years, you know, and I rely on the studies that I'm familiar with to say that. Here's the other reality. Virtually all children start with the same indicators of health at birth. Whether they're poor or not, they usually are fairly equal in weight if their mother has had decent nutrition, in height or length is the way we usually talk about children, head size, which means brain size if you want. But poor children rapidly lose ground in their early years. And so it was interesting to me that you had an early years project going. This is really significant, I think, and really important that continue. And they continue to lose ground without somebody stepping in and helping out, they lose ground, you know, without anybody helping out. So poor achievement is not a matter of intelligence or innate ability. It's more a matter of circumstance. And we've known this for quite a while. Now, if I want to give you a little more definition, and this isn't in the slides, and I might have put it in the slides, but Srini will know this, and any of you who are teachers know this. You keep on working at the lesson till you actually start delivering it. That's what I did. And as a result of that, I thought, oh, here's some things I should have included in the lesson. So I'm going to give you some statistics now. And since this is being recorded, they'll be available to you anyway, whether they're in the slide or not. In 2018, there were almost 88,000 children considered in poverty in Manitoba. That was an increase and that was an increase in 1 year of 2,500. So from 2017 to 2018, in the statistics that we're keeping in Manitoba, there's an increase of 2,500, but there's 88,000 kids. Okay. Of those, 16.3% live, or 16.3% live in very poor families where there are 2 adults in the family. So 2-parent families, we might say, poor 2-parent families are 16.3% of our population, as compared to 9.8% nationally. Okay. If you go to 1-parent families, the number goes up to 63.4% of people living in poverty. And of the people living in poverty, the people who regularly use Winnipeg Harvest, now called Harvest Manitoba, there are 85,000 people. 43% of those people, of those 85,000, are children. So you can see that this is an indisputable issue here. And we have other things that go along with this. I mean, in Manitoba, our minimum wage has slipped from 4th place to 8th place now, or even 9th place. And the minimum wage, according to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which the minimum wage is now $11.90, a sustainable or livable minimum wage would be $16.15. So here we are. We have a serious situation in Manitoba, one that needs to be addressed. So the Canadian Centre for Child Health Policy, who also came up with the other ideas that I mentioned earlier, have made some suggestions for solutions, and they've been doing this for probably 20 years now. And this is what they say. Early sustained nutrition, early childhood care and education, continuous childhood monitoring regarding health indicators with timely support of societal interventions. Secondly, and this is where the Rotary might think about what are things that we could be doing, okay? Ensured access to public venues, cultural events, activities, community events, and so on, so that poor children actually get to experience some of the things that people who are well off or better off experience as children. Those experiences, which are educational experiences, which are a real supplement to what happens in the curriculum in schools. And public support for further educational opportunities, meaning college or university or whatever, or workplace training. And finally, and this is one that they shared with both the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy and the Social Planning Council of Winnipeg have shared, local identification and intervention where the poor can be listened to, heard, and responded to. And this is a particularly, from a democratic perspective, this is a particularly important issue, that the people who are poor have a say in the help that they receive, are able to say, this is what I need, this is the help I receive. If you provide us with this kind of help, we think we can do just fine. So I'm just going to do a very quick, the next couple of slides I'm actually going to skip over. So if we go to slide 15, in most cases, I do a very quick lesson on what education is. And basically education is how we make sense of our lives every day and how we bring meaning to our lives every day. And that's the real purpose of education. It's different. It's much more expanded notion of schooling. Schooling basically says what we're preparing for is we're figuring out ways to make meaning out of our lives. We're figuring out ways to make sense of our lives. We're figuring out ways to make our lives more worthwhile. But education is actually an ongoing thing. In my academic terms, it's an ongoing enterprise where we're actually making meaning of things. We're taking new information and processing it and deciding how it impacts our lives. I'm also not going to spend much time. I'm going to finish very soon. But my harsh critique of Bill 64 is, first of all, if you read some of my stuff, it's based on either half-truths or outright lies. And so I'm giving this to you because you might want to ask me questions about what I mean about that. It never was about education, and it's not about education. There's no acknowledgement of the job done by the people in the system. With the suggestions that are being made, there's no kind of consideration of what actually happens to people who aren't in these categories, but who are in other categories like secretaries, bus drivers, and so on, who just become collateral damage of a centralizing system. It ignores the real system issues. Here are the real system issues. And I would, in many of my instances, I'm asked to talk about, well, if I was going to reform education, what would they be? And I would say, I would deal with the real issues. Indigenous teacher education, teachers for our Indigenous populations, particularly our First Nations communities, with the poverty cycle, with homeschooling, and the denial to many children. Some homeschooling is just fine. People actually are very good at it in dealing with their children, and there are reasons why some kids are probably schooled better at home. But in most cases, what it does is deny children the access to a social life where everybody is accepted and is part of the game, and you have to live with everybody, which is our public school system. So it ignores the fact that funding has been reduced, particularly with the last round of governments we've had in Manitoba. And it has a reliance on a particular kind of achievement assessment and reporting, which is always proven to compromise and jeopardize the opportunities for those people who are already disadvantaged. And it basically undermines the idea of public prioritizes training over citizenship, and it reframes education as a private versus a public good. I thought those would be of particular interest to you. And the next item, next slide is more of the same, but on a bigger picture level. It's a particular kind of economic policy. And this economic policy was something that was introduced for the first time in the United States by Reagan, but has been introduced around the world and in Britain by Margaret Thatcher. And it's the brainchild of an Austrian economist called von Hayek, which basically said we should reduce taxes, we should trust the economy to look after itself, and we should reduce all the barriers to private enterprise and stuff that exist. That's exactly the path we've been on the last while, and that's actually the path that many governments have bought into. This is not just a conservative agenda. This was the NDP agenda before the Conservatives were in power. This is the Liberal agenda at the federal level. This is the agenda in South Africa. You know, these agendas have been followed, and in virtually every place, and even the Scandinavian countries are being tempted now to follow these agendas. So it's a huge problem in my view. The social political agenda is basically reducing public service and reducing democracy, the people who are actually involved in making decisions and providing services. And then I have my political ethical agenda, which I would ask you to read at your leisure. So in conclusion, I would say I welcome this time to talk about it, because I think that Rotary is a group that doesn't just stand by and watch things happen. You know, and Srini has helped me understand that an awful lot. If you identify something, you actually try to do something about it, engage other people in it, and involve other people, bring people on board, and so on, and try to help out where you are, but internationally. And I think that you're a service organization, which we call, in the terminology we use, we call you a civil society organization or a civil society group, which is absolutely essential to democracy. Because civil society or groups like service groups like Rotary provide a space where people can talk to each other, where you can, it's a safe place where people can talk, make mistakes, make stupid suggestions, get away with them, you know, have people take them seriously and dig underneath to see what's really at stake, and so on. That's the kind of organization I imagine Rotary to be. And as I said, I thank Srini for that. A place where everybody matters and is valued. A place where if one person or more people are left out, there's a problem. Now here's the thing that the Rotary and any citizen in Manitoba can count on. The general public and parents have consistently expressed their satisfaction with their own teachers in schools. Study after study after study after survey has said, we're satisfied with our schools, right? We like our teachers are good to our kids, and so on. We're not so sure about the school down the road. I have to qualify it that way. But our schools we're satisfied with, they're doing a good job. Our teachers care about our kids, and so on. And we're not unhappy with what the school boards are doing. And survey after survey after said, the general public has consistently said that they're willing to pay more taxes if it goes towards good education for children. So what we need to do is change some of the public conversation about schooling, education, and the common good. And the way we do that is simply by talking. We don't keep quiet. We don't hesitate to give our opinions. You notice that I haven't. We don't avoid confronting things directly. We don't let our resentment and resignation and complacency rule the day. We engage others and our neighbors and our fellow citizens where we live. And so for many groups, and I'll offer you this as well, there are 507 people registered to speak to Bill 64 at the moment, right? And if you add your voices to that, I'd be very happy. You know, some of the people will simply be asking questions. They've simply said to me, is it okay if I just go and ask questions about this bill? And that's certainly okay. It's a chance for the public to weigh in on what's happening. So I'm just going to stop there because I should allow some room for questions. I hope I've given you something to think about, which is really all I hope to do. And I want to say, encourage all of you that any one of you and all of you together can make a huge difference in the public conversation, and the public conversation makes a huge difference in what our governments do and how they include or exclude people. So I'd be happy to respond to questions, and thank you very much for the time. I hope I haven't taken too much time, Nancy.